He was just the quiet man in the corner serving coffee at the military briefing, ignored by every officer in the room. No one knew his name. No one cared. Until a female general looked down at his hand and froze. It wasn't the way he moved. It wasn't what he said. It was the silver Navy SEAL ring on his finger. From that moment on, everything changed. The morning broke cold and quiet over the Navy base on the coast of Virginia, a thin veil of mist rising from the dew-covered asphalt. Faint sunlight struggled to break through the haze, casting a pale golden shimmer over the rows of weathered barracks and flagpoles that stood like silent sentinels against the wind. Ben Turner stood in front of his truck, one hand holding a beat-up thermos, the other reaching down to tighten the zipper on his daughter's coat. 7-year-old Lila looked up at him, her brown eyes wide with curiosity and something else, something wiser than her years. "You cold sweetheart," Ben asked, his voice low, warm, a little rough from a night of too little sleep. Lila shook her head, clutching his hand. "No, Daddy. I like the fog. It feels like we're walking in a dream." Ben smiled faintly. "Yeah, something like that." He looked at her, then out toward the gates of the base, where the world beyond their quiet corner would soon begin to stir. This job wasn't what he used to do, not even close. But it gave them structure, a place to start again, and maybe that was enough for now. They entered through the east side checkpoint, Ben flashing his temporary civilian badge, while the guard gave a curious glance at the little girl by his side. Ben had cleared it with the office last week. Lila would stay in the observation room just down the hall during his morning shift. They didn't have much of a choice. Childcare was expensive. Trust was rare. Inside the halls were sterile and gray, buzzing faintly with overhead lights, and the scent of burned coffee and bleach. Ben's old instincts scanned every corner like they always did. He couldn't turn it off, never had been able to. But he walked with his head low, eyes forward. The last thing he needed was attention. As they passed a pair of young officers in pressed uniforms, Ben heard a snide voice behind him. "Didn't know they let janitors bring their kids to the ops building," the other chuckled. "Maybe he's running a daycare out of the break room." Ben didn't turn around. He just squeezed Lila's hand a little tighter and kept walking. She looked up at him, sensing the shift in his posture. "It's okay, Daddy," she whispered. "They don't know." His throat tightened. This little girl his whole world understood more than most grown men. The briefing room was already half full when Ben arrived. He nodded silently to a junior lieutenant who barely acknowledged him and moved toward the back counter, setting down a fresh stack of printouts, reports, and a tray of coffee. He moved with the efficiency of someone used to pressure his motions clean and precise, though he never made eye contact. From the corner of the room, Lila sat quietly in a metal chair, legs swinging, cradling a picture book in her lap. She wasn't reading. She was watching. The officers filled the room with idle chatter, some discussing deployments, others scrolling through their tablets with bored expressions. A few of them shot casual glances toward Ben, some with vague amusement, others with mild annoyance. A couple whispered when he bent down to fix the jammed paper tray on the wall printer. He'd heard it all before. He could take it. The real sting came when they ignored the child beside him, as though she were invisible, just like her father was now. Attention on deck. The room snapped upright as the door swung open, and in walked General Tessa Brooks. She wasn't tall, but her presence filled the space. Dressed in a sharply pressed uniform, adorned with subtle commendations, her silver hair was swept neatly back, eyes steely and intelligent. The kind of gaze that didn't miss much, and the kind of woman you instantly knew had climbed through fire to earn that rank. Her boots clicked crisply on the tile floor as she walked to the head of the room, offering a curt nod. At ease. Ben moved to the back wall, quiet as a shadow. Tessa's eyes scanned the room. They passed briefly over the officers, lingered half a second longer on the man in the faded green jacket. She didn't say anything. Not yet. The briefing began. PowerPoint slides flickered to life. A lieutenant droned about updated patrol routes off the Somali coast. The tone was clinical detached, but Ben stood silently, arms folded behind his back, eyes on the maps. He caught inconsistencies the others didn't. Dots that didn't connect. Patterns that weren't mentioned. He didn't speak, but he saw. Tessa did too. She watched him from the corner of her eye. Who is he? When the meeting paused for coffee, Ben stepped forward, his movements fluid. He poured without looking, serving first the senior officers, then circling back toward the general. As he approached, the sleeve of his worn green field jacket slipped just slightly down his wrist, and that's when she saw it. The ring. A silver Navy SEAL trident ring. Old, weathered, etched with the legacy of pain, discipline, and brotherhood. The room didn't notice, but she did. Her breath caught for half a beat. The man serving coffee wasn't just another base worker. That ring didn't belong to a janitor. It belonged to someone who had bled for this country, someone forged in a crucible few survived. Ben caught the flicker in her eyes but said nothing. He placed the cup gently on the table, nodded, and turned to go. She stopped him. Quietly. What's your name, son? He paused, turned slowly. Turner. Ben Turner. And that girl, my daughter. Lila. Tessa nodded, her voice calm but deliberate. Mr. Turner, I'd like a word. In private. All conversation in the room ceased. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was reverent. The silence that settled over the room after General Brooks's request hung thick as wet wool. A few officers exchanged sidelong glances, uncertain whether to be amused, concerned, or simply confused. Ben didn't blink. He didn't ask why. He gave a slow nod and turned toward Lila, still sitting patiently by the door, her small white sneakers barely touching the floor. Come with me, honey, he said gently, his voice steady. Lila hopped off the chair and tucked herself under his arm like it was the safest place on earth, because it was. She glanced at the general, who gave her a faint, encouraging smile, then waited by the door until the rest of the room had emptied. General Brooks gave a subtle signal, and the remaining officers quickly gathered their tablets and left the room. Some cast curious looks back. One whispered, "What the hell was that?" before the door clicked shut behind them. The room fell into an unusual stillness. Just 3 figures remained: the decorated general, the quiet man in a faded jacket, and the little girl who carried more understanding in her eyes than most of the brass ever had. Tessa turned slowly, her eyes studying Ben, but not with suspicion, more like recollection. Like she was searching through her memory for a missing piece, a forgotten file in a classified folder. She gestured toward the table. "Please. Sit." Ben hesitated only briefly before pulling out a chair. Lila took the one beside him, swinging her legs gently, hands folded in her lap. Tessa remained standing. It wasn't a power play, it was something else. A hesitation that rarely crossed her command-hardened face. "You served," she said simply. Ben nodded. "Yes, ma'am." She tilted her head slightly. Navy SEAL Team 4. That got her attention. Her eyes narrowed, not with judgment, but with intrigue. Rank Senior Chief Petty Officer. Retired. Voluntary. Ben hesitated for the first time. His voice dropped. Not exactly. Tessa didn't press. She walked slowly to the end of the long table, resting her palms on the surface. Her gaze softened just a notch. "I recognize that ring," she said. "My late husband wore the same one. He was on Team 2. Ben looked down at the worn trident on his finger, the silver dulled by time and salt water, but still proud. I'm sorry for your loss, he said quietly. So am I.